Rules must be followed, no exceptions.
This is unfair and must stop now.
Patricia Thornton's boot hit my daughter's coffin with enough force to crack the white wood. The tiny casket rolled, spilling the stone angel my wife Emma had bought while pregnant. The guardian she'd said would protect our daughter when I can't be there anymore. This burial violates cemetery aesthetic standards, the board president said, standing over the disturbed grave. I'm authorized to inspect unauthorized interments. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known as her boot connected with that small white coffin, was that I'm a homicide detective. 14 years documenting crime scenes, and I just recorded her committing felony grave desecration on my phone. I'm Marcus Hayes. My wife Emma died 3 months ago during childbirth. Our daughter Lily survived 6 days before her heart gave out, and the woman who just kicked my baby's coffin thought she was enforcing HOA rules. If you've ever watched someone desecrate what you love most, you'll understand what happened next. So hit subscribe now. You just assaulted human remains, I said, voice steady despite rage burning through me. That's a felony in North Carolina, and I documented everything. Emma had chosen this spot under the oak tree while she was pregnant and healthy. She'd researched cemetery rights, documented guarantees in the HOA bylaws, made me promise our daughter would rest here where peace lives. She'd planned for everything, even the possibility she wouldn't survive to protect our child herself. The property consultant had no idea Emma's foresight extended beyond death, or that kicking a baby's coffin in front of a homicide detective would trigger an investigation that would expose 9 years of criminal fraud, $127,000 in embezzled burial fees, and a conspiracy to sell cemetery land containing 14 families' loved ones. Patricia Thornton thought she was inspecting an unauthorized grave. She'd just committed the crime that would end her forever. I documented everything the way I'd been trained. Photos of the disturbed coffin from multiple angles. Video of the scattered mementos. Emma's stone angel face down in the dirt, the wooden cross David Torres had helped me place, the solar light so I could visit at night. Evidence chain started the moment Patricia's boot connected with Lily's resting place. You can't record me without permission, she said, adjusting her blazer like she was leaving a business meeting, not a crime scene. I can document criminal activity anywhere it occurs. That's established law. I kept filming. You physically disturbed human remains without proper authority. North Carolina General Statute 14-149, felony grave desecration. The board president's confidence finally cracked. I have HOA authority over cemetery operations. Do you have state cemetery operating license? I asked. Because every cemetery in North Carolina requires one. It's not optional. Her pause told me everything. I'd spent the past 2 months researching cemetery law, the same way Emma had researched burial rights while pregnant. My wife had been thorough, obsessively so. She'd documented every conversation with the HOA, saved every email confirming cemetery access, photographed this oak tree from a dozen angles with notes about shade patterns and peaceful atmosphere. At the time, I'd thought she was being paranoid. Now I understood she'd been protecting our daughter from exactly this, from people who saw graves as obstacles instead of sacred ground. The inspection is complete, Patricia said, walking away. You'll receive formal notice about relocation requirements. You'll receive formal notice about criminal charges, I called after her. I'm a homicide detective. I know how to build a case, and you just gave me the opening crime. She didn't look back, didn't realize that boot connecting with my daughter's coffin had triggered an investigation that would expose every crime she'd committed for 9 years. Some mistakes you don't recover from. Desecrating a detective's family was hers. David Torres stood on his porch watching me repair Lily's grave, his hands trembling around a coffee cup he wasn't drinking. My neighbor for 2 years, the retired funeral director who'd helped arrange my daughter's burial with the kind of gentle professionalism that comes from 40 years in the business. Now he looked like a man carrying weight that might crush him. Marcus, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. I placed the stone angel back in position, Emma's guardian restored to watch over our daughter. About Patricia? His cup shook harder. He set it down, clasped his hands together like he was trying to stop the trembling. The cemetery, she's been operating it without state license for 9 years. I looked up at him. What? Every cemetery in North Carolina needs operating license from the State Cemetery Commission. Inspections, financial disclosures, proper permits. David's voice cracked. Patricia never filed for one. Every burial here, yours, the Martinez families, all 14 families, technically illegal because the cemetery isn't properly licensed. How long have you known? Since she became president, I helped establish the cemetery when the development was built. Told her we needed state approval. She said she'd handle it. He finally met my eyes. She never did. And when I asked about it 2 years ago, she threatened to report my funeral home for historical permit violations. Said she'd destroy my reputation, cost me my retirement benefits. His hands were shaking so badly now he had to grip the porch railing. I watched her kick your daughter's coffin, watched her scatter Emma's mementos, and I stood here doing nothing because I was afraid of losing everything I worked 40 years to build. But you're telling me now, because some things matter more than self-preservation, because I'm a funeral director and I just watched someone desecrate an infant's grave. David pulled out a folder with shaking hands. Everything. 9 years of financial records showing she's been pocketing burial fees. Families paid her directly. Money never went through proper cemetery trust accounts. $127,000 total. The board president had been running an unlicensed cemetery and embezzling from grieving families for nearly a decade. There's more, David said, voice barely above whisper. She's planning to sell the land. The HOA administration office smelled like cheap air freshener trying to cover years of paperwork decay. Patricia sat behind her desk reviewing documents like she hadn't just committed felony grave desecration 2 hours ago. Behind her, a framed photo showed the cemetery property with survey lines drawn across it. Mr. Hayes, she said without looking up, I assume you're here about the relocation assistance program? I'm here about you operating an unlicensed cemetery for 9 years. I set my badge on her desk. Homicide detective, which means I know how to investigate financial crimes tied to organized patterns. Her pen stopped moving. The cemetery is properly managed. You never filed for state operating license. Every burial here is illegal because you don't have authority to operate a cemetery. I pulled out David's financial records. And you've been pocketing burial fees. $127,000 from 14 families who thought they were paying for permanent resting places. The property consultant finally looked up. Those were administrative fees. Those were burial fees paid directly to you, not processed through proper cemetery trust accounts. That's embezzlement. I leaned forward. Why kick my daughter's coffin today? Why escalate to physical assault when you've been running this fraud for years? She stared at me, calculating, then pulled out a folder marked Caldwell Development Proposal. The cemetery occupies 2 acres of prime commercial property, worth $2.3 million to the right developer. She opened the folder showing architectural renderings, luxury condos where graves currently sat. All families will receive generous relocation assistance. Your wife and daughter can be moved to a proper public cemetery with professional grounds maintenance. Emma chose this oak tree specifically, made me promise our daughter would rest here. Your wife's emotional attachment doesn't override sound property management. The board president closed the folder. The sale requires voluntary family cooperation. I needed to demonstrate HOA authority to encourage compliance, starting with the newest, smallest grave. She targeted my baby's coffin deliberately, to intimidate 14 families into abandoning their dead. You just confessed to conspiracy, I said, on recording. Her face went pale as she noticed my phone on the desk. Still recording. The North Carolina Cemetery Commission office occupied a government building that had seen better decades. James Mitchell, the state inspector, pulled up records on his computer with the kind of tired efficiency that comes from years of bureaucratic investigation. Willowbrook Estates Cemetery, he said, typing. Let me check the licensing database. I waited while he searched. Behind him, file cabinets labeled by county stretched wall to wall. Decades of burial site registrations, operating permits, inspection reports. Everything Patricia should have filed and never did. That's odd, Mitchell said, frowning at his screen. No operating license on file, no initial application, no annual renewals, no financial disclosures. He pulled up another database. No inspection reports, no trust account registrations. He looked at me. Detective Hayes, according to state records, Willowbrook Estates Cemetery doesn't legally exist. 14 families have loved ones buried there, including my wife and daughter. then those burials occurred in an unlicensed facility operated without proper authority. Mitchell's expression hardened. That's criminal violation. Operating cemetery without license carries fines up to $50,000 and potential prison time. Who authorized the burials? Patricia Thornton, HOA board president. She's been collecting burial fees directly from families. $127,000 total over 9 years. Mitchell pulled out a form, started making notes. Burial fees paid to unlicensed operator constitutes fraud. Those funds should have been held in state-regulated trust accounts specifically for cemetery maintenance. He looked up. Detective, this isn't just administrative violation. This is systematic criminal operation disguised as HOA cemetery management. There's more. She's planning to sell the land to a developer, needs families to voluntarily relocate remains so the sale can proceed without legal complications. She can't sell land containing human remains without proper procedures, death certificates, next of kin notifications, state approval, disinterment permits. The legal requirements alone take months. Mitchell pulled out more forms. How did she plan to circumvent that? I showed him the video of Patricia kicking Lily's coffin. By terrorizing families into relocating voluntarily, starting with the smallest grave to set an example. Mitchell watched the video 3 times. That's felony grave desecration and conspiracy to commit fraud regarding burial sites. He picked up his phone. I'm contacting the Attorney General's office. This requires criminal prosecution, not just administrative penalties. I sat in my car across from the cemetery that night, watching. Surveillance is 90% patience and 10% catching people when they think no one's looking. Patricia had scheduled inspections of 3 more graves for tomorrow. The Martinez family's grandmother, the Chen family's son, the Rodriguez family's infant daughter. She was systematically targeting the families she thought would be easiest to intimidate, the newest burials, the smallest graves, the families still raw with grief. My phone buzzed. Emma's sister Sarah, texting from California. Mom said Patricia wants to dig up Emma and Lily. Tell me that's not true. I started typing a response, then stopped. Headlights swept across the cemetery entrance. Patricia's Mercedes, 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. She parked, looked around, then walked into the cemetery, carrying a flashlight and clipboard. I grabbed my camera, followed at a distance. She wasn't heading toward any of the graves scheduled for tomorrow's inspections. She was walking to Emma's oak tree, to Lily's restored grave. Through the camera's zoom lens, I watched the board president kneel by the stone angel, examine the wooden cross, check the solar light I'd replaced. She pulled out her phone, took photos of everything, made notes on her clipboard. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached down and pushed the stone angel over, deliberately, stood up, photographed it lying on its side, wrote more notes. She was staging evidence, creating documentation that the grave was improperly maintained or structurally unstable to justify her relocation demands. I recorded everything. Her deliberate vandalism, the staged photographs, the falsified inspection notes. When she walked back to her car 20 minutes later, she had no idea I'd documented her manufacturing evidence to support cemetery closure. Back home, I reviewed the footage. Combined with this morning's Coffin assault, David's financial records, and Mitchell's confirmation of unlicensed operation, I had enough for criminal charges. But there was something else. Something about her careful documentation of the angel she deliberately knocked over. She'd done this before, to other graves, building fake inspection records to pressure families into voluntary relocation. I pulled Emma's burial files. My wife had documented everything, including photos she'd taken of other graves in the cemetery. I compared them to current conditions. 6 graves showed similar patterns. Memorial objects mysteriously falling over, flowers accidentally disturbed, decorations requiring removal for maintenance. The property consultant hadn't just kicked my daughter's coffin on impulse. She'd been systematically desecrating all 14 graves for months, manufacturing justification for forced relocations. David Torres's funeral home office still smelled like lilies and furniture polish after 40 years. He spread documents across his desk with hands that had finally stopped shaking, or maybe he'd just made peace with the trembling. I kept copies of everything, he said, pulling out file after file. Every family who paid Patricia burial fees, every conversation where she promised proper cemetery management, every time I asked about the state license and she told me to mind my business. I reviewed the documents. 14 families, payments ranging from $5,000 to $12,000 each, all made directly to Patricia's consulting company instead of through HOA accounts. Not a single receipt mentioned state-regulated cemetery trust funds. Here's the worst part, David said, opening his laptop. County records. Patricia filed paperwork 6 months ago claiming the cemetery was abandoned, said there hadn't been active burials in over 10 years, and she was requesting authority to relocate any remains for property redevelopment. My daughter was buried 3 months ago. I know, and the Martinez grandmother was buried 8 months ago, and the Chen boy 14 months ago. David pulled up the county filing. She falsified every date, every detail, told the county clerk's office the cemetery was a historical site with no living relatives to contact. That's fraud in official proceedings. It gets worse. He opened another file. Emails between Patricia and Richard Caldwell, the developer. She's been negotiating this sale for 18 months. The deal is contingent on voluntary family cooperation in relocating remains, and she promised him she'd handle it. I read the emails. Patricia describing her pressure campaign to encourage relocations. Caldwell asking how she planned to convince families to move loved ones. Her response: strategic enforcement of cemetery maintenance standards will motivate compliance. Strategic enforcement meant kicking my baby's coffin, meant systematically vandalizing 14 graves to terrorize grieving families into abandoning their dead. There's one more thing, David said quietly. He pulled out a final document, a contract between Patricia and Caldwell Development. If the sale goes through, Patricia receives $400,000 personal finder's fee for facilitating property acquisition. She wasn't just selling cemetery land. She was profiting directly from forcing families to dig up their loved ones. $400,000 for successful intimidation of 14 grieving families. I'm testifying, David said. Whatever she threatens, whatever I lose, I'm testifying. Because I helped bury your daughter, Marcus. I held Emma's angel figurine and promised you it would watch over Lily forever. And then I watched that woman kick your baby's coffin, and I did nothing. You're doing something now. It's not enough, but it's what I have. He pushed all the documents toward me. Everything. 9 years of fraud, falsified county records, emails proving conspiracy with the developer. Use it. Make sure she never touches another family's grave. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen's office overlooked downtown Raleigh, 13 floors of legal authority that Patricia Thornton had never anticipated facing. Rebecca and I had worked cases together for 6 years. She prosecuted the financial crimes I investigated. Now she reviewed evidence of the most personal crime I'd ever documented. Felony grave desecration, Rebecca said, watching the Coffin assault video for the 3rd time. Physical disturbance of human remains without proper authority. That alone carries up to 5 years. It's not just the assault. I spread David's documents across her desk. 9 years operating unlicensed cemetery. $127,000 embezzled from 14 families. Falsified county documents claiming the cemetery was abandoned. Conspiracy with developer for $400,000 personal profit. Rebecca pulled up North Carolina criminal statutes on her computer. Operating cemetery without license. Criminal violation with up to $50,000 fines per year of operation. That's $450,000 in potential fines. Embezzlement of burial fees, felony theft, filing false documents with county, fraud in official proceedings. She looked at me. Marcus, this isn't just multiple charges. This is RICO territory. Pattern of criminal activity through organizational position. RICO prosecution for an HOA president. She used HOA authority to commit organized fraud, embezzled fees, operated illegal cemetery, conspired with developer, systematically vandalized graves to terrorize families into compliance. That's racketeering, using legitimate organization to facilitate criminal enterprise. Rebecca pulled up case files. We've prosecuted RICO for less. The pattern is clear. Ongoing criminal operation disguised as property management. I showed her the surveillance footage of Patricia deliberately knocking over Emma's stone angel, staging photos, falsifying inspection reports. She did this to all 14 graves, months of systematic desecration to build fake maintenance records. That's conspiracy to commit fraud and sustained harassment campaign. Rebecca made notes. Combined with the developer emails showing $400,000 kickback, we're looking at wire fraud when electronic payments crossed state lines. How long would she serve? If we prosecute everything? Grave desecration, operating unlicensed cemetery, embezzlement, fraud, RICO conspiracy. We're looking at 12 to 15 years minimum. She met my eyes. But I need to know you can handle this. You're the primary victim and the investigating detective. Defense will argue conflict of interest. I documented everything by the book. Chain of custody, proper evidence collection, witness statements from David Torres, who has no connection to me except being my neighbor. I pulled out Emma's burial documentation, and my wife's research proving Patricia knew families had guaranteed burial rights. This was deliberate, calculated fraud. Rebecca reviewed Emma's files, every email with the HOA, every photograph of the oak tree, every document proving permanent cemetery access. Your wife was thorough. She knew she might not survive childbirth. She protected our daughter even from the grave. The county clerk's office held records Patricia thought no one would ever connect. I'd spent 3 hours reviewing burial permits, property transfers, and development applications filed over the past 2 years. Each document told part of the story the board president had tried to hide. Here, the clerk said, pulling up digital files. Thornton filed this 6 months ago. Petition to designate cemetery as abandoned historical site with no active burials or living relatives. I photographed the screen, Patricia's signature on documents claiming the last burial occurred in 2012. My daughter had been buried 3 months ago. She falsified every date. And here's the property reassessment request from 8 months ago. She asked the county to reclassify the cemetery land from designated burial ground to undeveloped recreational space. That would make it eligible for commercial development without the legal restrictions protecting cemetery property. Did the county approve it? Still pending review, but if approved, the reclassification would have made selling to Caldwell Development much easier. No disinterment permits required, no next of kin notifications, no state cemetery commission involvement. The clerk pulled up more files. She also filed multiple noise complaints and maintenance violation reports about the cemetery, claiming it was neglected, attracting vandals, creating liability issues, all designed to build a paper trail justifying closure. I reviewed the complaints, all filed by Patricia, all describing conditions that didn't exist. Systematic documentation fraud to support illegal land sale. Back at my precinct, I compiled everything into case files, video of Coffin assault, financial records showing $127,000 embezzlement, David's testimony about unlicensed operation, State Cemetery Commission confirmation of violations, county documents proving false filings, developer emails revealing $400,000 kickback, surveillance footage of Patricia vandalizing graves to manufacture evidence. My captain reviewed it all. This is solid, Hayes, but you're personally involved. We need independent verification before taking this to the DA. Already done. State Inspector James Mitchell is filing criminal complaint for unlicensed cemetery operation. Rebecca Chen at the DA's office is building RICO case. David Torres is testifying as HOA insider, and I've got 14 families ready to file victim impact statements. 14. Every family with someone buried in that cemetery. Patricia terrorized all of them. Fake inspection reports, manufactured maintenance violations, pressure to relocate their dead so she could profit from selling their graves. I pulled up the spreadsheet. Martinez family, Chen family, Rodriguez family, all harassed for months, all told their loved ones' burials violated standards that don't exist, all pressured to dig up family members so the enforcer in Crimson could collect her developer kickback. My captain looked at the evidence. How fast can we move on this? Rebecca's presenting to grand jury next week. State Cemetery Commission is filing administrative penalties, and I'm coordinating with all 14 families to ensure their victim statements are ready for trial. She's going to claim HOA authority justified her actions. She can claim whatever she wants. She kicked my baby's coffin on video. That's not HOA authority. That's felony assault on human remains. I closed the case file. And everything else, the embezzlement, the fraud, the conspiracy, that's organized crime disguised as property management. The grand jury hearing took 4 hours. Rebecca presented evidence systematically, video of the Coffin assault first, establishing the visceral crime that had triggered everything else. Then financial records showing 9 years of embezzlement, county documents proving falsified filings, developer emails revealing the conspiracy, surveillance footage of Patricia staging grave vandalism. 14 families testified, Mrs. Martinez described finding her mother's grave marker deliberately pushed over, flowers scattered, inspection tags claiming improper maintenance. Mr. Chen detailed threatening letters demanding his son's relocation, citations for memorial decorations his family had placed with love. The Rodriguez family showed photos of their infant daughter's grave, toys removed, solar lights confiscated, crosses marked for aesthetic violations. Every family told the same story: systematic harassment designed to terrorize them into digging up their loved ones so Patricia could sell the land beneath their grief. The grand jury returned indictments on all charges: felony, grave desecration, operating unlicensed cemetery, embezzlement, fraud in official proceedings, RICO conspiracy, wire fraud. Patricia was arrested the next morning at her home. I wasn't there. Conflict of interest kept me away from the actual arrest, but Rebecca called me from the courthouse after arraignment. Bail set at $500,000. She posted it within an hour. Rebecca's voice carried satisfaction. But her attorney knows this case is unwinnable. Video of her kicking an infant's coffin, 14 families testifying, financial records proving embezzlement, state inspector confirming illegal operation. Defense has nothing. Will she take a plea? Her attorney's already asking about options, but we're not negotiating much. The coffin assault alone is enough for serious prison time. Add everything else, and she's looking at 12 years minimum. That evening, I visited Emma's oak tree. The stone angel was back in place, watching over Lily's grave. I'd reinforced it this time, concrete base so no one could knock it over again. The wooden cross stood straight. The solar light glowed as darkness fell. She's facing charges, I told Emma, told Lily, told the oak tree that had become our family's sanctuary. 12 years in prison, maybe more. She tried to erase you both for profit, tried to sell the place you chose for peace. But she failed. The oak's branches moved in the evening breeze. 60 years of growth providing the shade Emma had wanted for our daughter. The peace she'd promised still lived here, under these branches, in this ground where my wife's wisdom had protected her child even from the grave. David Torres joined me, standing quietly beside the oak. The other families are planning memorial service, all 14, together, honoring our loved ones and the fact that no one can force us to move them now. Patricia's development deal is dead? Completely. State took emergency control of the cemetery, issued proper licenses, established permanent protections, and Rebecca's prosecution has scared every developer away. No one wants land with this much criminal history. The courtroom held more people than the judge's usual docket. All 14 families filled the gallery. The Martinez family, the Chens, the Rodriguez family, parents and grandparents and siblings of the people buried under Patricia's threatened cemetery. They'd come to watch justice for the graves she'd tried to sell. Rebecca stood for opening arguments. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you're going to watch video of the defendant physically kicking an infant's coffin. You're going to hear testimony from 14 families she terrorized. And you're going to see financial records proving she embezzled $127,000 while operating an illegal cemetery for 9 years, all to profit from selling land containing human remains. Patricia's defense attorney tried arguing HOA authority, property management necessity, misunderstanding about licensing requirements. None of it mattered after the jury watched the coffin assault video. 3 jurors cried, 2 looked away. All of them stared at Patricia with the kind of revulsion that decides verdicts before testimony begins. David Torres testified about the unlicensed operation, his voice steady now. She knew state law required cemetery licensing. I told her multiple times. She ignored it because proper licensing would have required transparent financial accounting, and she was pocketing burial fees. State Cemetery Commission Inspector Mitchell testified about the systematic violations. Operating cemetery without license for 9 years. No trust accounts, no financial disclosures, no inspections. Every burial was illegal because the facility lacked proper authority. The Martinez family testified about their mother's desecrated grave, the Chens about their son's vandalized memorial, the Rodriguez family about their infant daughter's toys confiscated as violations. Then, I testified, not as the investigating detective. Conflict of interest prevented that. As the father who'd watched his baby's coffin kicked over by a woman planning to sell the grave for profit. My wife Emma chose that oak tree while she was pregnant, I said. She researched cemetery rites, documented everything, made me promise our daughter would rest there. She knew she might not survive childbirth. She protected our child even knowing she might not be there to do it herself. Rebecca played the video again. Patricia's boot connecting with Lily's white coffin, the tiny casket rolling, Emma's stone angel tumbling into dirt. The defendant kicked that coffin deliberately, I continued. She told me it was to establish HOA authority, to encourage the other 13 families to voluntarily relocate so her developer sale could proceed. She targeted the smallest, newest grave to intimidate everyone else. She turned my daughter's resting place into a weapon. The jury deliberated 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts: felony grave desecration, operating unlicensed cemetery, embezzlement, fraud, RICO conspiracy, wire fraud. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge reviewed victim impact statements from all 14 families before speaking. Ms. Thornton, you used HOA authority to commit organized criminal enterprise. You desecrated graves, embezzled from grieving families, and conspired to sell land containing human remains for personal profit. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison, $400,000 in restitution, and permanent prohibition from any HOA leadership position. Patricia was led away in handcuffs while 14 families watched the woman who tried to sell their loved ones finally face consequences. 6 months after Patricia's conviction, the state held a ceremony at Willowbrook Cemetery, not to close it or relocate graves, but to protect it permanently. A bronze plaque mounted on stone stood beside Emma's oak tree, official designation that made this ground sacred under law. Catherine Cross Memorial Cemetery, the plaque read. Protected historic burial ground. Public access guaranteed in perpetuity. They'd used Emma's full name, the name she'd chosen carefully, researched thoroughly, documented completely while pregnant, and planning for peace her daughter would need. Her wisdom had protected Lily from the grave, and now that wisdom protected 13 other families too. All 14 families stood together under the oak's branches, Mrs. Martinez with photos of her mother, the Chen family with their son's favorite toy, the Rodriguez family holding their infant daughter's blanket, families bound by grief and Patricia's attempt to profit from that grief. Your wife saved all of us, Mrs. Martinez said to me. Her documentation, her research, it proved we had burial rights Patricia couldn't override. Without Emma's work, we might have believed we had to move our loved ones. David Torres placed flowers at Lily's grave, professional composure finally at peace. I spent 40 years helping families honor their dead. Then I watched someone desecrate graves and did nothing because I was afraid. Emma taught me that some promises matter more than fear. The property consultant was serving 12 years in prison. The cemetery was properly licensed, permanently protected, managed by the state with transparent accounting. Emma's oak tree would stand for another 60 years, providing shade for our daughter and everyone else resting in the ground Emma had fought to protect. I touched the stone angel, Emma's guardian finally unmovable. You chose well, I told my wife. This place where peace lives. You knew what Lily would need, what I would need. What 13 other families would need. You protected us all. The oak's branches swayed in afternoon breeze, 60 years of growth sheltering graves that would never be sold, never be moved, never be threatened again. Patricia had tried to turn sacred ground into commercial property. Instead, she'd created permanent legal protection, ensuring no HOA could ever profit from graves. Emma's wisdom had transcended death, bylaws, and corruption. Her daughter rested where peace lived, protected by law and love and a mother's foresight that reached beyond the grave. If you've ever fought to protect what matters most, if you've ever stood up against people who saw profit where you saw sacred ground, subscribe and share your story in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, because sometimes the promises we make to the dying become the battles that protect everyone. Emma chose this oak tree knowing she might not survive to see our daughter rest beneath it. But her choice, her documentation, her love, those survived everything. Even HOA presidents who kicked coffins for profit. Some promises transcend death. Some love builds protections that last forever. And sometimes, a detective documenting his daughter's desecrated grave becomes the case that changes how cemeteries are protected. Patricia Thornton thought she was kicking a baby's coffin. She was ending her freedom forever and protecting 14 families she'd tried to terrorize.